The Marseille Drug Gang, often referred to in the context of the French Connection, was a powerful and notorious criminal organization that operated primarily from the 1930s to the 1970s. Based in Marseille, France, the gang became a major hub for heroin production and trafficking, with international reach, particularly to North America. Here's a detailed look at their history. Origins, 1930s, 1940s. Location. Advantage: Marseille, with its busy port and proximity to North Africa, Corsica, and mainland Europe, was an ideal base for smuggling operations. Corsican influence: the gang was heavily influenced and operated by Corsican mafia families, many of whom had relocated to Marseille. They had deep political and police connections that helped protect their operations. Post-Huaytite expansion. After World War II, Marseille became a battleground between the French Communist Party and Corsican gangs, who were allegedly supported by the CIA to suppress communist influence in the city. Rise of the French Connection, 1950s, 1960s. Heroin labs. The Marseille gang began refining morphine base, imported mainly from Turkey and other parts of the Middle East, into pure heroin in high-secret laboratories hidden in and around the city. Key figures: Paul Carbone and François Spirito, earlier. Pioneers in organized crime and drug smuggling. Antoine Guérini, a major Corsican mob boss in the 1950s-60s, influential in the French underworld. Jean Jean, Gaëtan Zampa, and Joseph Cesari. Later figures involved in expanding the operation. Export to U.S. The gang's heroin was smuggled to the United States, mainly via Canada and New York, and distributed by organized crime groups, particularly the American Mafia. The French Connection uncovered, late 1960s, early 1970s, global impact. At its peak, the Marseille gang was responsible for 80% of the heroin entering the United States. Law enforcement pressure. French and American. Authorities began cracking down on the trade. Major busts. A series of arrests and seizures in the late 1960s and early 1970s began to cripple the network. The most famous was the 1972 seizure of 425 kilos of heroin in Marseille. Pop culture. The gang's operations inspired the famous films The French Connection, 1971, and its sequel, Decline and Fall, 1970s, 1980s, Heroin Labs. Dismantled French police, under pressure from the U.S., shut down numerous labs in the 1970s, end of the French Connection. By the late 1970s, the original French Connection was effectively dismantled. Shift in trade routes. Heroin production and distribution routes shifted to Southeast Asia's Golden Triangle and later Afghanistan. Legacy and aftermath: corruption and politics. The gang's history is deeply entwined with allegations of corruption, political manipulation, and intelligence agency involvement, especially during the Cold War. Modern Marseille. Today, Marseille still struggles with drug-related violence, but modern groups are more fragmented and less international than the old French Connection. Cultural legacy. The Marseille Drug Gang and the French Connection remain significant in the history of global narcotics trafficking and international law enforcement cooperation post-French Connection era, including the resurgence of gang activity in Marseille, key personalities like Gaëtan Zampa, and how the modern underworld evolved. Post-French Connection power vacuum, late 1970s, 1980s, Gaëtan Zampa and the new Marseille Mafia, Gaëtan Tani Zampa, rose to prominence in the 1970s after the fall of the Guérini brothers. Born in Marseille to a Corsican family, Zampa was considered the new godfather of the city. His organization continued drug trafficking, including cocaine, extortion, racketeering, and arms smuggling. He was known for being extremely violent and secretive, maintaining strict discipline in his organization. Wars with rival Zampa's reign was challenged by rival gangs, especially Jackie Imbert, Jackie Lamat, who led his own faction. Their conflict resulted in a bloody gang war in Marseille during the 1980s, involving dozens of assassinations. Law enforcement struggled to contain the violence due to corruption and fear. Zampa's downfall. Zampa was arrested in 1983 and found dead in prison in 1984 under suspicious circumstances, alleged suicide, though some suspect assassination. His death marked the symbolic end of the old-school Marseille godfathers. The modern era, fragmentation and evolution. 1990s today, rise of new criminal networks following the death of Zampa and disbandment of major crime families. Marseille's underworld fragmented into smaller, loosely affiliated gangs. Many were rooted in immigrant neighborhoods, particularly North African communities. These new gangs were more decentralized and less politically connected. Shift to cocaine and cannabis with heroin roots shifting to Asia and Latin America. Cocaine and hashish became more dominant in Marseille's drug trade. The port of Marseille, one of the largest in Europe, remained a key point of entry for drugs from South America and North Africa. Weapons and urban warfare. Modern Marseille gangs are known for heavy military-grade weapons, including Kalashnikov rifles. Shootouts and ambushes, often linked to turf wars over drug territory, occur frequently in low-income housing projects like La Castellane. Police and political crackdowns. The French government launched multiple initiatives to combat the violence, such as Operation Hydra, targeting criminal networks in Marseille, deployment of special anti-gang units, BRI, RAID, increased surveillance and cooperation with Europol and Interpol. Key themes in Marseille's criminal history, geography and legacy. Its port and Corsican connections made it a natural hub for crime. Corruption and state complicity. Decades of law enforcement and political corruption allowed gangs to thrive. Evolution of crime from structured mafias, Guérini, Zampa, to fragmented networks. Media and culture. Marseille's criminal underworld has inspired films, books, and documentaries. The modern gang wars in Marseille, the law enforcement response, and the cultural portrayal of the city's criminal underworld. This paints a full picture of how the legacy of the Marseille Drug Gang evolved into today's volatile and violent landscape. Modern gang wars in Marseille, 2000s-2020s, drug trade as the primary engine, cannabis imported from Morocco via Spain, and cocaine from South America are the dominant drugs. Sales are typically handled in the city's northern housing estates, Les Cités, with young men running points to deal, drug dealing points, some earning up to $100,000 per month per point. Explosion in violence, assassinations, and drive-by shootings are common, often executed with Kalashnikov rifles, which are trafficked from the Balkans. The killings are typically settling scores between rival crews over territory and profits. Many victims are teenagers or young adults, both dealers and innocents caught in the crossfire. Key criminal factions, post-Zampa era, Yoda, and DZ Mafia, names of powerful drug-dealing networks. Controlling major neighborhoods, Bandon du Sud versus Bandon du Nord, rival coalitions often tied to specific cités. Some gangs now mimic cartel-style operations, complete with enforcers, scouts, and lookouts with radios. Law enforcement response and challenges, high-profile interventions, Operation Place Net, 2019 ongoing. Government initiative to retake territory and disrupt gang activity. Special police units, BRI, RAID, deployed in northern Marseille in military-style raids, undercover work and surveillance, tech-driven surveillance and tapping operations to map drug networks. Challenges, faced youth recruitment. Gangs recruit boys as young as 12 years old as lookouts or dealers. Socio-economic deprivation, high unemployment, lack of state presence, and poor infrastructure fuel gang control in many suburbs. Judicial bottlenecks. French courts are overwhelmed with drug-related arrests, often delaying prosecutions. Impact on society and culture, urban decay and fear in neighborhoods like La Castellane, Félix Piat, and Les Flamands. Residents live under the constant threat of gunfire and drug-related tension. Locals often describe a parallel economy, where gangs provide jobs, protection, and even social support, similar to how mafia groups once operated in Italy. Cultural portrayal film and TV LA French, 2014. Also known as The Connection, starring Jean Dujardin, portrays the story of the judge who dismantled the French Connection. Bassi. Nord, 2020. Based on real events, it highlights police corruption and brutality in Marseille's toughest districts. Marseille, Netflix, 2016. A political drama that weaves Marseille's underworld into city politics. Music and identity Marseille. Rap groups like I Am, Cypher de la Rime, and Jules reflect both pride and criticism of the city's gritty reality. Lyrics often touch on themes of poverty, violence, police abuse, and loyalty to the neighborhood. Conclusion. The legacy of the Marseille Drug Gang, the Marseille Drug Gang no longer exists in its traditional Corsican mafia structure, but its legacy lives on. It laid the foundation for one of Europe's most entrenched drug trafficking hubs. It shaped how France and the US collaborated on anti-narcotics policies. It showed how geopolitical interests, CIA, anti-communist efforts, can intersect with organized crime. Today, its descendants are younger, more volatile, and less ideological, focused solely on control, profits, and survival.